You guys always seem to enjoy my What Happened To videos that feature a player that abused the portal, and today I have another example of that. A couple of years ago, Nick Evers was seen as one of the top quarterbacks in the country, but as we flash forward a few years, he has pledged his loyalties to 4 different schools: Florida, Oklahoma, Wisconsin, and now UConn. Nothing has quite worked out for Nick at the college football level, and some of it is his fault and some of it isn't. But in today's video, we're going to do a spotlight on Nick Evers, talk about why he was such a sought-after recruit, and the timeline of his career since then. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's go ahead and get started and talk about what happened to Nick Evers. In order to understand how Evers got to this point, we first need to go back in time. His parents would meet at Texas A&M, where they were basketball walk-ons for the men's and women's team. Apparently their first date featured a game of one-on-one, and she would say, quote, "It's a good thing he didn't let me win." Eventually they ended up having Nick, and as he got more and more involved in sports, they developed a long-term relationship with quarterback coach Kevin Murray, the former Texas A&M star and father of Kyler Murray. When Nick got to 8th grade, he was seen as a guy with some potential. Murray said that Nick was not a phenom by any stretch, but his arm whip and natural spin looked very promising. His father said, quote, "When someone of Kevin's caliber says I believe in you, it meant so much to Nick and our family." Eventually he got better and better, and there were 2 obstacles that could have broken down Nick Evers, and the first occurred when he was 11. He was trying to earn playing time as a wide receiver, and apparently he belted making a catch on a slant route and got up too slowly for the coach's liking, and the coach said, quote, "You've got no heart." The criticism actually bruised the kid more than the tackle did, and his mom, hearing the exchange, remembers, quote, wanting to snatch that coach in two. But instead she told Nick to change his body language because the coach was misreading his cues. The next setback would come during October of his freshman year, when Nick ignored an aching throwing arm and then eventually suffered a mid-game stress fracture while making a pass. The break was so violent the referee heard the snap of his bone, and Nick recalled looking down and saying, "Oh my goodness, my arm was just hanging there." He immediately wondered if he'd ever be able to throw the ball again, plus he was getting a ton of criticism from people saying he wasn't meant to play quarterback, and it could have been easy for Nick to quit. Eventually he blew up at Flower Mound High School as he threw for 2,300 yards with 19 touchdowns and also ran for 648 yards and 14 scores on the ground. While his passing accuracy did take a dip as a senior, he flashed more of a dual threat ability that could probably get him to a higher level. Initially in his recruitment, Florida was going after Cade Klubnik and Connor Weigman, but those both ended up choosing Clemson and Texas A&M, and the fallback option was Nick Evers. He eventually would commit to Florida in March of that year, but only after evaluating schools using a spreadsheet with 20 different success line items with weighted scoring. This was his parents' suggestion, and his dad said, quote, "It gives you something quantitative to look at along with what your gut tells you." As I said, he decided to commit to Florida and became the next great quarterback for head coach Dan Mullen, and he was pumped to be building something special in Gainesville. His stock soared even higher in July of that year when he would place 3rd in the Elite 11 camp in Los Angeles. He said, quote, "There are times where I look at all the hard work I put in and not see the outcome. It was like, what am I doing wrong here? Why am I not getting the same accolades as some of these other top quarterbacks in the nation? But my parents were right by my side, telling me to never give up, and that is just not what an Evers does. We keep on fighting." At the time of his commitment, he was a 3-star recruit and the number 447 player in the country, but his summertime performances in the Elite 11 would eventually raise his profile to 4-star level. After his commitment to Florida, he said that he was super excited to help build things in the swamp, and he was going to try to help recruit a class and do something special in 2022. But then things would change. As he was at Sunday school one day in Flower Mound, Texas, he would get a notification on his phone. He immediately felt the gravity of the situation and would text the news to his parents that Dan Mullen was fired. Eventually he would decide to decommit to Florida because of this, and it was an interesting time because Mullen was fired just a month before December signing day, and he had to figure everything out. His mother said, quote, "Nick had to process the loss because he talked to Dan all the time. We love Dan and we consider him a friend, so we felt for him. But we reminded Nick throughout recruiting that the person who recruits you is probably not going to be the one who sees you graduate." As the family drove home after church, he recalls getting a ton of messages from fellow commitments and even one top 100 player who was on the verge of announcing. They are all wondering what was going on. The quarterback, who minutes before was in a flux, reigned in shock and tried to radiate calmness. He said, quote, "We knew stuff like this could happen, and all the really good things about UF are still there." He ended up becoming the number 4 ranked player at his position according to some sites, and all of a sudden, he was speed dating different schools. He considered Ole Miss, Notre Dame, Oklahoma, Texas Tech, Texas, Iowa, Indiana, Virginia Tech, and Boise State, amongst others. He said, quote, "It's been humbling. I'm really blessed to be considered as an option." Where would he end up going? Well, he would get a chance to go up to Oklahoma. They had recently lost the commitment of Malachi Nelson, who followed Lincoln Riley to USC, and after seeing a mass exodus, Oklahoma finally found a gem as they ended up getting Nick Evers to commit. He had at least 26 offers, but he chose the Sooners after a conversation with new offensive coordinator Jeff Lebby. He ended up signing with Oklahoma over Florida, Auburn, Penn State, and Texas Tech. An interesting side note is that once Lebby got the hiring paperwork out of the way, the first thing he did was drive to Flower Mound, Texas to recruit Nick Evers. Lebby also recruited him while he was at Ole Miss, and after Evers had committed to Florida, he said, quote, "Man, this guy's going to be a special player, and he's got a special skill set." In total, during his junior and senior year, Evers threw for 5,000 yards and 44 touchdowns, and also ran for 18 more. Scouts saw him as the next great quarterback who could both throw and run the ball, and it looked like he pretty much checked every box for being a good college player who had potential to play on Sundays. According to 24/7 Sports, Evers was a 4-star recruit, number 8 quarterback, and the 137th best player in the class of 2022. So, how would he end up doing in Norman? Well, let's take a look. When Evers would arrive at Oklahoma, he was actually in a decent position, as the Sooners did not have a great amount of depth at the position in 2022. They no longer had 5-star after 5-star backing each other up, and this would lead to an opportunity for Evers to hopefully get on the field a bit. They had just brought in UCF transfer Dillon Gabriel, who was 100% going to be the starter, and after that, they really just ended up having Evers. Everyone was excited about the true freshman in Norman, and Lebby said, quote, "He's been preparing his whole life and his whole career to compete for a job in college." As I said, at first it was just him and Gabriel, but eventually they would bring in junior college transfer General Booty, and they ended up getting Pitt transfer David Beville. However, he was by far the most talented and had the highest ceiling of any of those 3 guys, and if something would happen to Gabriel, his number was likely going to be called. He ended up playing his part, as he worked hard in practice, but apparently he just wasn't picking up the scheme, and eventually he just did not get on the field. In total, he had just 1 completion during his time at Oklahoma, and that was an incompletion in a 49-0 loss against Texas. He said, quote, "It's frustrating, but I've played the patient game my whole life. I'm confident in God's plan that he's going to put me in a place that he wants me to be, and I'm just trusting his timing and trying to stay true to that." Unfortunately, Evers would decide to jump ship after the 2022 season and would enter the 2023 transfer portal. Dillon Gabriel was going to return, and they brought in Jackson Arnold, so I guess he saw the writing on the wall. He entered the portal on December 5th and eventually visited Wisconsin, and then after teasing pictures on social media, he announced his plans to transfer there, as Luke Fickell was now taking over as the head coach. When he got there, the quarterback room was kind of barren, but eventually Tanner Mordecai and Braden Locke transferred in, so he would have plenty of competition in Madison. His talent throwing the ball had been evident in spring practice, and apparently he had the strongest arm of the 5 in the group, and then combining that with his mobility made many people think that Evers had all the potential in the world. This past season, Tanner Mordecai ended up being the starter, but after he got hurt, they turned to Braden Locke instead of Evers, and Nick literally never saw the field. Instead of rolling with the 3rd-year quarterback, Wisconsin once again decided to get another transfer, as they went and got Tyler Van Dyke away from Miami. While Locke wasn't anything special, he ended up solidifying himself at number 2, so once Van Dyke and Locke were going at it for the starting job, Evers was the 3rd man out, and once again, he decided he was going to transfer. They also had freshmen Mabry Mature and Cola Crew, and things were going to be really difficult for him in Madison. Van Dyke said, quote, "Nick's ceiling is through the roof, he's super talented, has a strong arm, and can throw all these off-platform throws." Sadly though, high praise from his teammate would not be enough to keep him there, as he decided to enter the transfer portal with 3 years of eligibility remaining, and decided to go somewhere where he could play. Honestly, it's not a terrible move, but where would he end up going? Well, yes, he was highly recruited. Everyone knew that Nick Evers was going to have to transfer down a level if he wanted to play. He ended up eventually deciding to take a spot with UConn, as they had just lost Taquan Roberson to the portal, and they'll be happy to get a guy like Evers right away. But that is not exactly how things would play out for Evers at UConn, as he would play in their first 2 games against Maryland and Duke, but he struggled. He only threw for 1 touchdown pass against the Blue Devils and did not score against the Terps. Eventually, Joe Fagiano would take over as the starting quarterback for the Huskies, and Evers was just relegated to backup duty. His best game would come against Wake Forest, throwing for 264 yards and 2 touchdowns, but all in all, Evers finished with about 918 yards with 5 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. It wasn't a great first year for Nick, and going into 2025, Joe Fagiano was given a waiver to come back, and that's exactly what would happen. UConn has completely rolled with him, and for a while, he had not thrown a single interception, so it seemed that they were making the right decision here. Evers ended up appearing in 2 games so far in 2025, going 8 of 11 for 83 yards against Central Connecticut, and then 2 of 4 against Florida International. Unfortunately, through his first 4 years of college football, he has not been able to do anything. He didn't step foot on the field at Oklahoma, never stepped foot on the field at Wisconsin, and has played very limited at UConn. I assume he has 1 more year of eligibility left, so if I were him, I would enter the 2026 transfer portal, but for now, it's been a little bit sad. He was once committed to Florida, was the future of Oklahoma, was potentially Luke Fickell's secret quarterback, and was supposed to at least save his career at UConn, but that has not ended up happening. But what do you guys think? If you're a Nick Evers fan, what has gone wrong, and who's another player who has been to 3 or more schools? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you can support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out one of the videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.